siempre voy a estar en las calles luchando por la libertad de mis hijos. Y bueno.
There's a story unfolding in Venezuela right now, one of revolution, intervention, national identity, crisis, and global power plays. It sounds like the plot of a blockbuster movie, but it's real life, and it's rewriting the future of a nation once rich with promise. This isn't about protests or elections alone. This is about a seismic shift in global politics. Let's break down what's really happening in Venezuela's political turmoil, from the streets of Caracas to the halls of the United Nations and beyond. The fall from grace, Venezuela's long slide into crisis. To understand where Venezuela is now, you have to understand how it got here. For decades, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in South America, thanks to some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. It should have been a paradise of prosperity. Instead, mismanagement, corruption, and political power struggles devastated its economy and society. Under Hugo Chavez, the revolutionary socialist government nationalized industries and centralized power. When Nicolás Maduro took over after Chavez's death, these policies accelerated. Inflation soared, oil production plunged, electricity grids collapsed, and millions of Venezuelans were pushed into poverty. Blackouts became a symbol of state failure, sometimes shutting down electricity for days across entire cities. Meanwhile, allegations of corruption and political repression mounted. Every step of the way, the opposition cried foul, citizens protested, and the CIA, the United States, Russia, and others watched closely. By 2024, the entire country was on the brink, economically weak, politically fractured, and socially tense. Election controversy and accusations of fraud. In July 2024, Venezuela held a presidential election. The government declared Nicolás Maduro the winner, but the opposition and international observers called it a sham. Critics pointed to a government-controlled electoral authority simply announcing results without transparency, leading to accusations that the process was neither free nor fair. Opposition leaders said the numbers were manipulated and that they had actually won. Venezuela's opposition had been fractured and repressed for years, with key leaders jailed, forced into exile, or blocked from running for office. What should have been a democratic turning point instead deepened the country's divide. This election wasn't just another political event, it was the catalyst for everything that came after. The US-led military operation, a turning point. Then came the moment that shocked the world. In early January 2026, what's been described as a US military operation, massive in scale and bold in execution, struck targets inside Venezuela. In the chaos of aircraft overhead and explosions in Caracas, President Nicolás Maduro and his wife were captured and taken to the United States. President Donald Trump later confirmed the capture, framing the operation as a campaign against narco-terrorism and criminal networks tied to the Venezuelan regime. Just imagine that for a moment the leader of a sovereign nation, once despised, once feared, once untouchable, suddenly apprehended by a foreign power and flown thousands of miles away to face federal charges. This is the kind of geopolitical twist rarely seen outside of textbooks. The U.S. justified the raid under anti-narcotics and terrorism mandates, but critics worldwide called it an illegal act of aggression that violated Venezuela's sovereignty. This wasn't a small skirmish. It was a major power play that sent shockwaves from South America to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Who's in charge now? The power vacuum and new leadership. With Maduro gone, the Venezuelan constitution was supposed to kick in, handing power to Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who was sworn in as the interim president. The Supreme Tribunal of Justice backed her, and the military publicly supported this transition. But what does interim really mean? This is where things get messy. Delcy Rodriguez was no neutral figure. She had been Maduro's ally and enforcer, involved in the same political structure that led to years of repression. For many Venezuelans and international observers, her legitimacy is questionable at best. Opposition leaders like Maria Corina Machado, who won international accolades, were sidelined from meaningful power. Some are still in hiding or exile, still plotting what comes next. So the question becomes, who really governs Venezuela today? The interim president, the military, the shadow of US influence, or the opposition underground ready to rise again? The streets of Caracas, tension, fear, and armed groups. Behind the headlines and political chess games, everyday Venezuelans are living in a climate of tension and fear. After the US strikes and Maduro's capture, armed militia groups, known as colectivos, have deployed across Caracas and other cities. These paramilitary actors operate with government support and have been accused of suppressing dissent, setting up checkpoints, inspecting civilians' phones, and intimidating anyone suspected of supporting the US operation. This isn't just political, it's street-level intimidation. Imagine walking outside and seeing armed groups controlling entire neighborhoods. That's the reality in parts of Venezuela right now. Journalists have been targeted, media freedoms restricted, and state-sanctioned emergency powers are being used to detain and arrest critics. The atmosphere is so authoritarian that civilian fear has become part of daily life, and speaking against the government can get you arrested. The international reaction, allies, foes, and divisions. This crisis in Venezuela isn't happening in a vacuum, and the world is watching. Reactions from across the globe have been diverse and explosive. Some countries, like the US under Trump, hailed the operation as a blow against corruption, drug trafficking, and authoritarianism. Others, including members of the United Nations Security Council, condemned it as an illegal abduction that undermines international law. South Africa witnessed protests against US intervention, with activists and officials denouncing the removal of Venezuela's president as an imperialist strike and demanding Maduro's release. European nations are split, some supporting humanitarian efforts and condemnation of repression, others wary of foreign military intervention. Latin American neighbors are on edgy, some fear instability spilling over borders, others call for diplomatic solutions rather than military ones. And while world leaders debate the legality and morality of this intervention, ordinary Venezuelans feel the consequences every day, the human impact, beyond politics. Here's the part the headlines sometimes miss: the human cost of this turmoil is staggering. Venezuela's political crisis has fueled one of the worst humanitarian emergencies in the Western Hemisphere. Millions of Venezuelans fled their homeland over the past decade due to hyperinflation, food shortages, lack of medical care, and infrastructure collapse. Today, international aid agencies are stretched thin, trying to support refugees and families still inside the country. And now, after the political upheaval, humanitarian needs have only multiplied. Infrastructure problems like power outages have left hospitals struggling. Economic collapse has eroded savings. Families worry about survival, not geopolitics. In the shadow of military action, everyday Venezuelans are caught in a crossfire between global powers and domestic tensions, and the long-term effects will be felt for decades. Oil, power, and global economics. Let's get real. This isn't just about ideology or democracy. There's a huge economic component too. Venezuela sits on massive oil reserves larger than those of Saudi Arabia or Russia. This makes the country strategically valuable on the world stage. After years of sanctions, plummeting production, and opaque oil deals, foreign companies and governments now see an opportunity to re-establish Venezuelan oil on global markets. But here's the catch: the financial markets see hope and chaos. Venezuelan bonds spiked after Maduro's capture, not because the economy stabilized, but because investors hope political change could lead to access to oil revenue. The global energy market is now watching Venezuela closely, because any shift in how its oil is produced or exported could affect global prices, supply chains, and energy security. So this crisis isn't confined within Venezuela. It ripples across commodities markets, global finance, and geopolitical alliances. What happens next? The road ahead. Now the big question on everyone's mind: what happens next? Right now, Venezuela stands at a crossroads. On one path is continued instability, paramilitary control, repression, economic hardship, and international friction. On another path is political negotiation, perhaps the release of political prisoners, reconciliation efforts, and a transition to some form of democratic governance. In fact, in recent days, Venezuelan authorities have begun releasing political detainees as a gesture toward national reconciliation. But are these actions genuine steps toward peace, or calculated moves to appease global pressure? Only time will tell. What we do know is this: Venezuela's story is far from over. It's evolving right now, and every day brings new developments. Why this matters to you? Here's the bottom line. Venezuela's political turmoil isn't just a distant headline about a crisis in South America. It's a story about power, identity, survival, global influence, and the struggle of a nation to find stability amidst chaos. Whether you care about geopolitics, human rights, economics, or simply the human spirit, what's happening in Venezuela right now is shaping the future in ways that could affect us all. Stay tuned. Pay attention, because this story is still being written, and it matters.